The church is great, but not perfect. And it is based on a book that was written by a professor, Rik Torfs. He is a Belgian, and you know, in Belgium, the country is bilingual. And in some parts they speak Dutch, in some parts they speak French, a small part they speak German. Rik Torfs, as his name also indicates, is a Flemish speaker, although of course he is perfectly able to speak many more languages. Rik Torfs wrote a book. The original edition is in Dutch, and if you want to read it, then you would have to learn Dutch. The kerk is fantastisch. The church is fantastic. Yeah, let's see. Rik Torfs, and here you see his picture, was born in 1956, so that makes him 68. But he is still a very, very active person. Has been a professor of canon law for most of his career, but has been for, I think, about 10 years also the president of the University of Leuven, which is one of the main universities, and he is internationally renowned. He also went into politics a little bit, and for a number of years was in the Senate of the Belgian government. Besides that, he is a writer, written quite a few books, and has also more recently done some television presentations. I met Rik Torfs in 1997 when I organized, together with Dr. Bert Beach, a congress in Budapest about the relationship between state and church in the new situation that had arisen in Eastern Europe. We had a congress that we were able to organize with great support of the Hungarian government. In fact, it was the only time when I was met at the airport by a car that drove up to the airport to get me and bring me to my hotel. I've never had that happen since, and I can tell you, you could get used to that. But anyway, there in Budapest, Rik Torfs, we invited him to come and be part of that, and he did. And he has ever since been involved also with the Adventist religious freedom activities as a member of the advisory board also of the Adventist Society for Religious Freedom in Europe. And so this is how I remained interested in Torfs, and I like to read what he writes, but also watch his television programs. He did a television series not too long ago, just before the election of the Pope in Rome, and he talked with a number of cardinals and asked them very, very frank questions. Very enlightening. Well, his book, The Church is Great. But he says it may be great, but it's not perfect. And he approaches this theme from 8 different perspectives. There's no system really in the book. And you may find there is little system also further in the presentation that I'm going to do. But he takes it from 8 different angles. But before he does that, he says there are 2 caveats. 2 things we must keep in mind. We must not expect too much from church leaders and clergy. Well, he has been working with canon law, so with all the legal issues in the Catholic Church. And he says, I've often seen things that are not really that beautiful. So let's not expect too much from church leaders and clergy. The church is there, however, to facilitate our relationship with God. But that remains the most important thing. The church does not replace that. It facilitates our relationship with God. And then he places emphasis on two aspects of what a church should be. He emphasizes in particular, and that's what I'm all going to do as well, the aspect of hospitality. The church must be a home for all who want to come. And of course, the church must be and remain a channel for transcendence. So the church is great. And he approaches that from these 8 perspectives. He talks about a church building. He says that's more important than many people realize. He recognizes there are many signs of decay in the church. Not all things are okay. Many things are not okay, in fact. But he says where you have decay, you also have humus. And there is some fertile basis for growing something anew. The church must be welcoming to everybody, including unbelievers. The church must function as an oasis. He also mentions the word asylum. It's where people can be at rest. It's where people can be free. It's where people can make confessions without being punished. Then he says he approaches the church as a hospital for people who are not okay, for people who are sick. He says the church is and should also be a place of humor. The church has often been and still is in many cases a place of beauty. But whatever else you can say about the church, there is one thing that is more important than anything else, he says, and that is the hope of the resurrection. If we can just continue to emphasize that, then the church to a large extent will be okay. Well, some of you know that I have looked a little bit in past years at Catholicism and at the relationship and contrast between the Catholic and the Adventist Church. And so I'm doing that a little bit again on the basis of this little book by Rik Torfs. Both denominations have in common that they see themselves as a true church. Even though the Catholic Church and the Adventist Church allow for some other church organizations to be somewhat of a church, but they are not really the church. The Catholic Church is the true church. And of course, the Adventist Church is God's remnant church for the last days. Adventists have shown traditionally considerable hostility towards the Roman Catholic Church. But sometimes they do not recognize that we have a lot in common. Although our doctrines are in some ways different, most of the doctrines of Christian theology we have in common. And whether we like it or not, we seem to both have a central magisterium, that is an entity that is mainly responsible for the formulation and development of doctrine. Now, the Catholic Church has officially such an organization in itself. We may not have it officially, but still more and more we see that what we should believe is somehow managed centrally by the top leadership of the church, together with such organizations like the BRI, etc. We have many similarities in our church organization, and we are more democratic than the Catholic Church, but we also have much of a top-down hierarchy. And what we have in common is that there is much beauty in our organizations, but we must admit that unfortunately there is also there are lots of things that are not so nice a lot of ugliness. When you look at the Catholic Church, I'm just mentioning here 5 things that I think are great, good things in Roman Catholicism. They have been a witness to the gospel through the centuries. When we look at how Christianity got to most places in Europe, of course, it was the Catholic missionaries that came, also including to the Netherlands in the, the 8th century, 9th century. The Catholics laid the basis on which the Reformation could build. Martin Luther and Calvin did not start from zero. There was something in the church that they could build on. They are, over time, and still are, involved in a global mission enterprise. And what the Catholic missionaries have done in many places is very impressive. They are strong in education and healthcare, and they have done a lot through the centuries in promoting the arts and promoting culture. So there are good things that Roman Catholicism has brought to the world, but it's not difficult to look at some of the bad things that we see in Catholicism through the ages. It's not difficult to find a lot of power struggles, corruption. The Catholic Church was, of course, the initiators of the Crusades with the idea Deus vult, God wants it. We think of the Inquisition. We can think of popes like the Borgias that were there in the Middle Ages. And if anything was ugly, it certainly was that. And then when we think of more recent things, the sexual scandals in Catholicism that have shaken the church. And of course, before we get to get the idea that it's only there, we must also admit that these things happen in our circles as well. But Catholicism has really been hit by these recent sexual scandals. So beautiful things and ugly things in Catholicism. Good things in the Adventist Church. This quest for biblical truth, which has, for instance, given us the Sabbath and a number of other beautiful doctrines. Good things in the Adventist Church is also the emphasis on education, healthcare, publishing, a large-scale missionary program, also medical missionary, something like ADRA, and this emphasis on healthy living, an holistic view of humanity, the idea of stewardship, all good things in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But also ugly things, we have to admit. Throughout our history, there has been this temptation of legalism and often fanaticism, extremism, and all of us know of examples of that today. The Adventist Church has also been hit by scandals, and those of you who have been around a little longer have heard the name Davenport, the Davenport scandal, the problem with the Harris Pine Mills, and the Pacific Press problem with the discrimination of women in payment, and all the ugly things around that situation. And then we had Robert Falkenberg, who had to withdraw from the presidency of the church because of his fraudulent actions. So ugly things, and ugly things with regard to racism and discrimination, continuing discrimination of LGBTQ+, and unfortunately also of women, and certainly women in ministry. And what I consider also to be one of the ugly things, now not everybody will agree with me, is the proliferation of independent ministries that often go out on a tangle and often present a kind of Adventism that I feel very uncomfortable with. So good things in both churches, ugly things in both churches. Now let's look at some of the angles from which Torfs looks at his church, and we can look also at our own church. He thinks that the church building is actually a pretty important part of being a church. And it's true that when we are on vacation, and that is probably true for many of you who've also visited Europe and other places in the world, visiting historic churches is usually part of what you do when you go to these towns, these cities in the older in Europe, etc. The church is often also in smaller places at the center of a village, the center of a town. And so the church is much more than just a building and just a place where some rituals take place. And Torfs makes the comparison. He says, when you visit a town, a city, and you have a castle and a church, then a church is different from a castle. It gives you a different kind of feeling. He likes the church when he visits it on his vacation to be empty, to be quiet, and he says that it must have a bit of a smell of holiness. In any way, churches should always be open. You should always be able to enter a church and light a candle. And maybe often the church is just an example of splendid uselessness. But anyway, the church is important. Church buildings are important. And I'm always impressed when visiting a town, a city, that Catholic churches tend to be open through the week on weekdays, whereas most Protestant churches are not, and that is just too bad. Now, Adventist church buildings, we don't have many historic buildings. We have a few. In some places, we bought some historic buildings, but most of our buildings are architecturally uninteresting. And maybe we undervalue the church building and often say, well, after all, it's the people. And the church, it's just a building. But a building is important for worship. Look at the Old Testament temple and everything that went on there. That building was important. Buildings also give a sense of community. You get used to going to a particular building. You have a history in that particular building. You have been baptized maybe in that building. Your marriage may have been blessed in that building. But Torfs also emphasizes that we must use the church as much as we can also for other spiritual and social activities. Make sure that the building has also a role for the neighborhood around the place where your building is situated. And it's important that where possible, and certainly when there is a need, a willingness to share your building with other faith communities. And that willingness is not always there in Seventh-day Adventist circles. Anyway, this is what he says and what he explains about the value of and the use, the role of the church building. Then he says there is, let's face it, a lot of things that are in decay in the church. He actually uses the word things that are rotting quite a bit. But he says we must be realistic. And the church has always had its problems. It already started in the early days. Read the letter of Paul to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, and you find that there were all kinds of things that were rotten, that were in decay already in that small church in Corinthians a few decades after Christ had been on earth. We must realize that the first Christians were also normal people and not saints. And Torfs says then, after he has mentioned lots of things that he has seen in the church, that I will never lose my faith because of the misconduct of crimes of priests, bishops, or popes. And I hope that many of my Adventist friends will be able to say also that we will never lose our faith because of what goes wrong in the church and what some pastors and maybe leaders are doing or have done. Torfs reminds us that church leaders in the past were not always virtuous people. And he then refers to, for instance, a painting of the Last Judgment by Giovanni de Modena, where in the picture you shoot naked bishops in hell. And you can see that they are bishops because they may be naked, but they still wear their mitres. So church leaders in the past have not always been virtuous people, and we should not be surprised if that is the case today as well. So that's the reality. There are things that are not right. There are things that are in decay. And that is the reality for Adventists. We must not glorify the past nor the present and think that there's nothing that is wrong, that everything is okay. We know that the pioneers were not all saints, and some of the historic books on Adventist history that have been written in recent decades have been very helpful to remind us of the fact that not all pioneers were saints. And we must recognize that, unfortunately, when we look around us, some churches are not okay. In fact, some churches are toxic. But at the same time, Torf says that we should actually approach this matter of decay with some optimism. He reminds us that whenever you have institutionalization, you have such problems with power and money and sex. And he says the problem is often not the person who does not follow the rules, but it's with the person or the institution that imposes the rules. It's sometimes just in the system, and we need to do something about it. But he says, let's be optimistic, because the church has, he feels, some self-cleansing ability. And dissidents disappear into the cracks of the church. We shouldn't panic too quickly. Things have a tendency to become okay again. But that does not mean that the church should get actively rid of troublemakers, because if it does that, it weakens itself. Decay, Torf says, produces humus. And there may be for many, when they see the decay, when they see the problems in the church, and that is true for the Catholic Church, that is true for the Adventist Church, there may be the temptation to give up, to drop out. But Torf says, let's draw strength from failure. Let's see the humus that is there, that provides the soil not only for protest, but also for renewal. And let's make sure that the failures of the institution do not affect the value of our faith. No, he writes, and I quote, in the failure of the institution lies precisely the strength, the humus, to better practice the Christian message itself. Now, that may not always be easy, but I think he has got an important point there. As I said in the beginning, welcome welcoming all is an important part of the point that Rik Torfs is making in his book. Often the question is asked what the church can still mean for people who are losing their faith. And I've heard priests and pastors say, well, you know, there are some people who only come here, come to church. There's something wrong. Excuse me. There is an echo coming from my wife's phone. Let me see. Still there. There are often pastors and we're trying to fix it. There are pastors and priests who say that, well, if people only want to come to church for their wedding or to have their funeral, that is not what the church are for. We are not going to facilitate that. But Torfs does not agree with that. He says the church can also mean something for these people at these particular occasions. Also weddings and funerals for non-believers and for believers on the fringe. Karl Rahner, he said that there are many people who are actually crypto-Christians. Now, that has been a hotly debated issue, whether you should call people who themselves do not confess to be Christians, whether you should actually talk about them as crypto-Christians, but he means that there are still some remnants of the Christian faith, of the sense of belonging to something bigger, and we should recognize that, and hopefully that will attract them in some instances back to the church. The church, he says, is the ultimate sanctuary for all forms of faith and unbelief. The church can also offer solace to people for whom faith is in a dip or who no longer believe at all. And he refers to Thérèse of Lisieux, and many of you may have heard of her, a young lady who she didn't become older than, what was it, 24 or something. And she wrote some writings that are still very influential. And she was actually, after her death, appointed a doctor of the church. That's a very special title in the Catholic Church. But significantly, she was plagued by a lot of doubt, even in the last phase of her life. And Torfs refers to that and says there is place for doubt in the church. And we should not make it, well, we should welcome people with their doubts into the Christian fellowship. The church is at its best when it's engaged in faith, of course, but meanwhile does not mind unbelief. So that is, these are some quotes that I think are very meaningful. But what do we do as Seventh-day Adventists who are truly welcome in our faith community? And maybe we can talk about that a little later when we have our discussion, but it seems that our Adventist theology actually presents us with a number of obstacles to welcome everybody in our midst, because there is the idea that we are separate, that we are remnant, that we are the rest. In the past, there was this idea that we were just 144,000, so a relatively small group. There's also the idea that the church is mostly a community of saints, of people who are already well on their way to the kingdom, and who have overcome their sins and their problems. And then, of course, the church is continuously plagued by the danger of perfectionism, in particular in the last generation theology that is still so vibrant in many parts of the world. So these are some things that make it difficult to say everybody is welcome. No, in fact, we don't want to welcome everybody. We want to be a remnant, a closed group of people who really belong to this small group that's going to make it in the end. But I would, with Rik Torfs, say that we should really open the doors, open them wide, also for people who maybe don't have the conviction that all the Adventist doctrines are okay. Some call themselves or are called by others cultural Adventists. They're still somewhat in the Adventist world. Their network of friends and relatives is often in the Adventist church. Their lifestyle is still at least partly Adventists. Well, let's make sure that they feel welcome, that they can come and be with us whenever they want to be. And of course, I hope that in the not too distant future, we can be really inclusive when it comes to people of a different sexual orientation. And that people who are in any stage of faith or doubt will feel that they can come and that they are welcome. So that's a very important aspect of, I believe, being church. And that is where many of our local churches have a lot of work to do. There is then also the point of oasis that is mentioned by Torfs. That has a long history, that the church could be serve as an asylum, that people who were fleeing, people who were in danger, could find sanctity, could find safety in a church building. Of course, there have been some restrictions and laws have differed from place to place, but in most places, the law is not supposed to disturb worship. Now, you see a picture here of a family. This family has been in a church in a place called Kampen, that is about 30, 40 kilometers from where we live. And there has been a church service going on. These are people from Syria. A church service going on since November 24 to make sure that the police will not come, our form of ICE will not come and deport these people. So there is a 24/7 church service going on in this church in Kampen since November 24. And this happens from time to time in various churches in the Netherlands, but also in other countries. The church serving as an asylum, as a place where people can be safe. And church as a sanctuary has also different aspects. In the Catholic Church, there is the possibility, of course, going with your guilt, with your sins, going to do a confession. And interestingly, the current Pope wants to restore the confession to a larger extent than it is happening today. The church is also the place, and that is true for both Protestant and Catholic churches, a place where people should be able to receive counseling, where people should receive pastoral care. And we all know that that is sometimes not happening enough. Anyway, the church should be a place where people who are with us feel safe because we are all brothers and sisters. Now, this is an ideal, but it's nonetheless something that is important. Torfs says, well, the church as a sanctuary has another dimension. If you sit in church, you can think about anything. You don't have to listen to the service if you don't want to. It's a place of absolute freedom. Many Protestants in Europe are discovering the monastery. They go for a week or maybe a little longer to a monastery where they take part in the daily prayers and where they can have a period of quiet and the possibility to think and discover themselves. And of course, even the Zoom services and as ATSS, as what we are doing now, it's a kind of sanctuary where we can be who we are. And some people will refer to this as my church, my sanctuary. The church as an oasis, the church is also a kind of hospital, a field hospital that must be able to heal the wounds of the people. And the author, Torfs, deals with diagnosis, tell the people what the world is like, telling them about the things that they need to look out for, but also prevention, a message against fear, against hatred, against populism, with a specialization, an emphasis on mercy and forgiveness. People who are hurting, in particular, should be welcome in the church and should be welcome to participate in what a church does. Church is a hospital, but also as a school for learners. We know that a church is often led by moralists who do not always lead a moral life themselves, but that should not worry us unduly. The ideal, yes, is that leaders must set an example, but not dictate in detail how people should live. But we see that sometimes our leaders are not living the way they should live and are not giving the kind of example that we should expect. But then let's take reality into account. Human beings will not be perfect. And I actually had never thought of these two examples that are given of Zacchaeus and the Good Samaritan. You know, Zacchaeus, the publican, he knows he has done wrong, but then he gives away half of what he has and then keeps the other half for himself. That's interesting. He doesn't give away everything, considering what he has done wrong. And the Good Samaritan also outsources part of the care to the innkeeper. So Torfs mentions a few of these examples to show, don't expect people to be perfect, not even the leaders around you. You're not perfect yourself, and they are not either. Well, I'm looking at my watch, so the time is running, but humor must also have an important place in the church. We don't always admire those who are in authority. We acknowledge them, yes, we should, but also criticize them from time to time, take them to task. But it's good when that happens with humor. Humor always makes life more pleasant. But sometimes you can approach things that are difficult to say with words and images. You can do that with humor, sometimes with cartoons. And humor will sometimes define something with razor-sharp precision. Exaggeration sometimes exposes the essence and can relieve a lot of tension. Now, when we talk about humor, of course, it's tempting to just tell one joke. And And it's a joke that you may have heard because there are many versions of it, but it indicates how a bit of humor can say something that is really sharp and true. Now, how many Catholics does it take to change a light bulb? Answer: 1 to change the light bulb, but first you need permission from the bishop and you need to consecrate the light bulb first. So how many Baptists does it take to change a light bulb? 2, 1 to change the bulb and 1 to get the coffee ready for after the service. How many Pentecostals? 10, 1 to change the bulb and 9 to pray for the light to spread. How many atheists does it take to change a light bulb? 0, because they don't believe the light bulb ever went out. And then see whether you agree with it or not. How many Adventists does it take to change a light bulb? Just 1. But he must first set up a committee to investigate whether it may be done on a Saturday. And, you know, it is true, isn't it, that we can often go from one committee to the other at every level in the church. Beauty. Beauty leads us to appreciate the transcendent. Art in the church is important. And there's lots of religious art in music, in paintings, everywhere, and many people appreciate it, and not just the aesthetic experience, but there's something that they gain from it. So beauty, art in the church is, I think, very important. Catholic worship, there's always something to see. All kinds of things are happening. The senses can participate. And that is often in contrast with services in Protestant churches that can be rather boring. And for the Adventist church, there is a challenge that there be more attention for liturgy. I would like to see more attention for the liturgical year, for the special Christian feasts. And we must remember that, yes, it is about content, but it is also about form. Finally, Torfs tells us the church has one central duty, and that is to focus on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The church must, as far as its doctrines is concerned, not stay fanatically focused on secondary issues, but he says must keep the light of the resurrection burning. Now, in his book, Torfs refers to some things that he has been thinking about with regard to the life hereafter. And as a child, he says we were told that in heaven we will eat rice porridge with golden spoons. And he says that has bothered me my whole life because I don't like rice porridge. And what fun is it to eat rice porridge with golden spoons? And then he says, yes, there are many questions with regard to eternity, with regard to the eternal life, the resurrection. How does it take place? A child that died as a child, will that child come in the resurrection as a child? A man or woman who died in the prime of his or her life, will they be resurrected as such? And will an elderly person who is struggling with incontinence, will she be resurrected as such before being turned into a better form of life? He says there are all kinds of problems and questions that we really should leave behind us. We must recognize that the resurrection is the core of our faith. And Paul emphasizes that in particular in 1 Corinthians 15, when he says that if we do not believe in the resurrection, then we might just as well give up, because then it's all nonsense. But it's a faith without knowing. It remains faith. And he says basically, I liked that very much, and some of you may have seen that I have written about that just 2 or 3 days ago in a column on the Adventist Today website, that the church must talk about this hope, proclaim this hope, which is being open to the unimaginable absolute future. And he says, that is what counts. And the secondary things and all the questions that we might have, let's leave them behind. But let's make sure that we are open to this unimaginable absolute future. And in the column of this week in Adventist Today on the website, I have also referred to the concept of negative eschatology that Torfs refers to in his book. It is maybe better not to emphasize a lot of things, but just a few things that we know will not be there, we are told. And then let's just emphasize that our faith has to do with the unimaginable absolute future. So maybe you can, if you haven't done so, read this on the website of 2 or 3 days ago. In conclusion, and I'm quoting here again from the book, the state of the church is not always beautiful, but often it is. The church is also a place of decay, a fearful guardian of absolute truth, mistress of morality who herself does not always take morality seriously. But, he says, that does not stop me from appreciating the church greatly, from finding it fantastic. It does not require perfection. Now here, Torfs is talking about his church. I can repeat that in reference to my church. The state of the Adventist church is not always beautiful. Often it is. But the Adventist church is also a place where a lot of things are wrong. That does not stop me from appreciating the church greatly, from finding it fantastic. It does not require perfection. Thank you so much.
All right, it's time to raise your hands. This is the time when we have a discussion and people ask questions of Dr. Bruinsma about the topic that he raised or anything that's on your mind. I'm going to give you some guidelines, and that is we don't want someone to dominate the conversation, but we're interested in hearing what your thoughts are. I'd like to encourage people who have not participated before, maybe to raise your hands and share your thoughts with us. You can do that. There's usually a button at the bottom of your screen, at least that's how it is on mine, that says reactions. And you can raise your hand there, and I will make my best attempt to call on you in order. Sometimes people are kicked out of the meeting for one reason or another. And if they come back, I'll have them go back to the beginning of the line if we've lost them. I had told Lauren when he asked me to host the meeting today that I'm having messages on my computer that say my internet is unstable. So it's possible I may get kicked off at any time. And if I had my picture silenced because of that, but here I am. If I get kicked off, Lauren says he'll jump into the gap, and that's how we're going to work it out today. So thank you so much, Lauren. I'm going to go, hold on one second. And our first person with his hand raised is Lester Kaiser. And have you unmuted, Lester? I think you have. Go ahead. We're interested in hearing your comments.
Okay. Thank you, Reinder. As usual, it's good to hear your voice. Reminds me of my late Dutch dad, so glad to hear that. My question for you is, if the church must be a sanctuary for all, how do we reconcile that with doctrines or policies that have historically caused harm, especially to those on the margins? In other words, the safety require the church to rethink not only how it communicates, but what it teaches. Thank you.
Well, Good to see and hear you, Lester. And, Lester's parents were missionaries in Suriname. Suriname is a country in South America where they speak Dutch. And I had the privilege once of staying for a week with your parents when they lived there in Suriname. That was a great experience. And we have met since and hope we'll meet again in not too distant future. But, this is the first question, but probably also the most difficult question that you could ask. Because if we are saying that people are welcome, then they should be afforded the space that they need. And there must be the opportunity for them to also say what they think and disagree where they want to disagree. And obviously, that is something that is a long way off in many of our local churches. Now, expecting that the church at the top will change a doctrine, that is not very realistic. That does not happen, as far as I know, in most churches. It is seldom. The usual tendency is to no longer talk about certain things, no longer emphasize certain things. And then gradually over time, some things will recede into the distance. And that is also what we can expect in the Adventist church to happen. It has happened in the past. Some things that we used to emphasize, we no longer emphasize. And it seems to me that at the moment, we are seeing that the doctrine, for instance, of the investigative judgment is gradually moving away from us. But that takes time. And once you have put a list of 28 fundamental beliefs together, and you have made them more and more precise, it would be a very difficult process to actually revert that. But in a local church, a lot more can be done. And there, I do not expect that the local church will from the pulpit say, well, as from today, we will only have 24 fundamental beliefs because we are not in agreement with 4 of these. But what you can expect in a local church is the kind of atmosphere where people feel that this is not going to be a problem if I do not agree with everything, or if I just interpret some things somewhat differently. And fortunately, Lester, there are churches where that is the case and where people feel that there is that kind of welcome. And that's, where we have a degree of influence, we can try to make that happen. It will not happen everywhere. And, some people may feel welcome in one church, but not in a church that is 25 miles down the road. So sometimes people will just have to find also a place where there is that sanctuary and where is that safety. Well, that's a long answer and maybe not quite answering your question, but it needs to be found, I think, in that direction.
Does that answer your question, Lester? All right, I'm moving on to Lauren. Lauren Seibold, I think you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bjorn. I want to pull Bjorn in here just for a minute now that everybody's on. Bjorn, are you there?
He's raising his hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Gina got me to unmute. Cool.
Go ahead. Tell us what you're doing.
You just
where you're
want
at.
me to talk. All right. Yeah. Okay, I was going to work this into my comments as usual, but Cherry Ann was on too. Both Cherry Ann and I and my friend Heather May, we're all taking part in the AT Summer Challenge. A lot of you were here at the start of the call when I mentioned this. We are doing different challenges during the month of August, all in the effort to support AT as part of the summer fundraiser. So I'm going to post some links where you can support us. And I'm doing another mega run, starting my 220 miles tomorrow from Pisa to Monte Carlo, trying to run a marathon a day. Cherry Ann is posting pictures, one daily, with some inspirational descriptions. And that is also, I'll post a link to that. And Heather's doing recipes, one a day as well, all throughout the month. So different ways you can support us. I'll post the links. Also, if you just want to donate to AT to keep ATSS going and growing, I really appreciate that too. I really I'm very grateful for everyone that supports AT. That's why we can do this kind of thing. It's not free for the organization, and we're just very grateful. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lauren, like Bill's $25 per mile pledge, or matching pledge. So if anyone can do $25 per mile for my run, Bill will match it. He's on the call. He's giving the thumbs up. So yeah, anything to add to that, Lauren? We're just excited to go and a little bit nervous the day before it starts.
Of course, I'm sponsoring Bjorn for $5 a mile. Carmen and I are doing that. So I know some of you could manage that if you felt so inclined, but you don't have to do that. Well, thank you, Bjorn. I wanted to slip that in. I also want to say that next week we have the fellows from the podcast Seeking What They Sought coming to talk with us. They've had some really interesting interviews with various people, including Elder Wilson and others. Some of you are familiar with that podcast, so they're going to be here next week. Now, to get back to the topic at hand, Reinder, thank you. This is very interesting. I've got a couple of reactions, and one of them Lester already anticipated, and that is that there is a big difference. I've talked with my friends in places like the Inland Empire of Southern California, and they say, well, the church is great, and if you don't like one church, you can just go to the other. And I say, yeah, but you're not in Ohio. It's a whole different world out here in the flyover country. You may not be able to find a church that you really feel good and warm about. But what I really wanted to talk about was church buildings. Mr. Torfs seems to think that church buildings are very important, and I suppose they are. But too often through the years, I've seen buildings become the object of a congregation's attention, the sole object. It's what they worry about. It's what they want to keep alive. They're more concerned about their clubhouse than they are about their congregation. And as a church begins to deteriorate in numbers, they seem to focus more intensely on their church building. They try to raise money to keep the church building open. This bothers me. I don't think it's a very great way of handling the concept of congregation, Reinder. In addition, it creates a big problem that's happening right now in Europe. And of course, you know about this. I just read an article not long ago that said that they're expecting that within the next I can't remember if it was a decade or 2 decades, but I think it was 1 decade. They're expecting that 2/3 of the church buildings in the Netherlands are going to be unused and will have to be deconsecrated. in Germany, they said in the next 10 years, they're expecting 10,000 churches to no longer be used. And what do they become then? Well, a church is a pretty building. Sometimes you make it into a nightclub, or you make it into a boutique, or you make it into a restaurant. There's a big deconsecrated Catholic church in Pittsburgh that Carmen and I go to have dinner sometimes, and it's become a restaurant brewery. There was a church in Zanesville where I had a church that is now a quote unquote gentleman's club. In other words, a strip joint. And every time I drove by it, I thought, how must that make people feel who were baptized there or got married there, or and so I've got like doubts, Reinder, about this concept of the building being something that we ought to focus on. How much better would it be if it was the congregation you focused on, even if you had to worship in a gymnasium somewhere, or rent somebody else's church, perhaps, but in some way that it wouldn't be geographically located. That's just a thought that I have. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm not wild about the concept of church buildings anymore.
Okay. Well, yes, we see a lot of churches being closed. In fact, if Adventists want to have buildings, this would be a good time to start buying some of these, and especially Catholic churches, because Protestants who want to close their church, they tend to sell it to the highest bidder. And if it's somebody who deals in real estate, or project developer, that is what Protestants will tend to do. Whereas most Catholic church owners, and that is either the diocese or the parish, they will try to find another Christian group that will buy their church, and that makes. In the time when I was in charge in the Netherlands as the union president, we bought a few Catholic churches at a very good price. But yeah, I share your concerns to a large extent. And certainly when the whole focus is on building or augmenting or beautifying your church building, because in a way that is the easiest things to do.
That's right.
It is something that is manageable as a project, etc., etc. And I don't think that Torfs meant to say that the focus should be in that way on the building. And I'm certainly not wanted to say that. And I'm glad that you are correcting that. But at the same time, I say that it does matter what your church looks like. And also to the function of your church. We have some churches in beautiful places. Now, for instance, we had a beautiful church in Amsterdam, right on one of the canals. We no longer have it. We sold it because it was very difficult to heat. And we were heating almost half the sky of Amsterdam. And it was difficult to find a parking place anywhere near. But it had a very beautiful historic organ. We could easily have had a daily organ concert in that place and brought in, people from everywhere. We never tried really to use that what we had there. We have some churches in areas downtown, and you could use them for different kind of things rather than for just the Sabbath morning service. So and I think it's that type of thing also that is referring to. And I don't know, whether any of you, when you go to a church that is open and when you visit and you light a candle, I think many of you do actually. And why can we not have something similar, in places where, anyway? So I'm with you that and keeping your church at any cost, and focusing entirely on the building. I agree with you. That is not what I intended at all.
No, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks,
Just
Lauren.
having been a pastor of small churches and seeing how they value their clubhouse above all, it just while the church is just the congregation is just dying away. That's all I'm saying. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Agree.
That's sad. Bjorn, go ahead.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Reinder, for the thought-provoking presentation. I'm wondering, how much do you? I mean, I agree that the church is great, however imperfect it is. It's the community to me that matters most. So I guess my question for you is, to what extent do you think we have to agree for church to be good? Because yeah, I mean, there's no way everyone's going to agree on everything. Certainly not 28 fundamentals, and no one actually knows, how well. No one actually knows everyone's beliefs and private beliefs, etc. So I guess I'm asking, do you have to agree with the majority of people to enjoy church, to be able to take active part in a church community? Or can you genuinely just go there for spiritual community and just drop the requirement that people agree? What's the healthy balance there? What do you think? Because I enjoy going to all kinds of different churches, conservative, liberal, in between, whatever, not Adventist, and I always enjoy spiritual community, even if I don't agree. So, to what extent do we have to agree?
It is difficult to quantify that. The most important part is that people who enter the door of the church feel that they are genuinely welcome, and that there is an atmosphere that where you feel well, uplifted is maybe too big a word, but where you feel, yes, it's okay to be here. Now, I don't know, when you say you have been to many different churches, you may also have been to churches where you felt straight away, there is so much tension here. There is so much here that I don't like, that I'm not going there again. So there needs to be an all over atmosphere that makes people want to be there. Now, I think in any religious community, there needs to be a certain degree of well, not unanimity, but a certain of that you share the same values and some of the same basic doctrines. If you want to, certainly in the kind of church that we have, where we also have, for instance, Sabbath school and so on, it is important that there is, I think, some kind of basis. Why would you come every week on Saturday morning to a church if you do not believe that the Sabbath has some importance? But the idea that you have to agree in every small detail, actually most of the people in the church do not know any of more than maybe 15 of our doctrines or so at most.
Yeah, if that. Yeah.
Yeah. So asking for, that people agree with everything. Well, and for one thing, I was baptized when we only had 22 fundamental beliefs. So, yeah. So as to your question, we don't need to agree, but we need to give space to each other. And we don't even need to like all the people, but we need to respect the people and be able to do some things together, to sing together and pray together. Because after all, it is a community. And
Thank you. Yeah, potluck helps too.
And thank you, Bjorn. I'm going to go to Dana. Where are you calling from today, Dana?
Hi, thank you. From the holy city of Loma Linda, halfway to heaven.
Exactly.
And you are, Lauren, you are absolutely right. You have your pick of churches around here. But I did grow up in a socialist Romania where you only had one Adventist church per city, if you are lucky. And I do know what you mean. And my husband is a retired pastor, so we did have two congregations for 15 years. And one of them was a very small church with elderly people. And I understand when you talk about the sacrifices that a community makes to save their building. I mean, my husband was a contractor in a previous life, so he did everything for that church just for the price of the materials. And one day when a new person, a visitor came, I was just cleaning the toilets, and he mistook me for the janitor. So I know what you mean. And not but, and when you think of the building as the home for the congregation, as the home of the family that is the congregation, then maybe it's easier to understand all the sacrifices, because who wouldn't sacrifice everything to save their family home? I think we would all do that. And I come from a family that did that for 45 years. So I remember not seeing my dad for 3 years because he was coming home after I would fall asleep and leave the house before I would wake up, because we were doing renovation at the church during the socialism era. And he spent all his money in that church. So that matters. That's what I'm trying to say. That builds community. That creates a sense of belonging. So that is not lost on me. I get where you are coming from, but that is not lost on me. And then I wanted to thank very much, a big thank you to Dr. Bruinsma for giving me this gift, the gift that the church doesn't have to be perfect in order to be useful. That is a huge gift for me today. And I want to share something else. I grew up with maybe not an aversion, but a fear of Catholics. And I move away from that. The first step was when one of my Catholic colleagues in maybe 6th grade came and told me, I think we are the same. Why was she saying that? Because we were both very faithful in comparison with the majority Orthodox Christians in the country. And then I got to work as a chaplain. I got to work with two wonderful priests in my hospital. And we pray together, and we pray for each other, and we respect each other, and we serve people together. And literally, I feel like we are brothers and sisters. We are Christians together. One of my biggest regret is that our church did not, adopt the creed, because that is, to me, the core fundamental belief of Christianity. And finally, I want to share another experience. deep spiritual experience in relation with a building. I visited Notre Dame and Sainte-Chapelle, which is very close by, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I cried in both buildings for the beauty that was there. But my deepest spiritual experience happened in Sagrada Familia. I don't know if you visited or not. In my opinion, every person that is a believer has to go there at least once in a lifetime. I had a sense that the time has stopped. I didn't know when 9 hours have passed because of my deep knowledge of the Bible, I was able to identify all kinds of symbols in that building. And literally, I had a spiritual experience. So that's what buildings can do if they are done right. So thank you.
Mm.
Did you wish to comment, Dr. Bruinsma?
Well, this was mostly a comment rather than a question, and I much appreciate that. And I think we have various aspects here. Yes, there may be churches that are not worth saving, and there may be instances where too much is put into keeping the building and not focusing on anything else. But what you mentioned is that some buildings, and that is true for art as well, have the capacity of giving us a religious experience. And
If you don't mind me chiming in here, I know that it was probably back in the 1980s and 90s in the United States, they talked a lot about students having different learning styles. And they had been traditionally all schooled in the same way of sitting in a desk by yourself learning. And they realized that there's some people who were more visual learners, some were auditory learners. And I think about the church experience and your comments about art. And there are some people that is their best pathway to God. And I think that we have to be open to people coming to God in different ways.
thank you.
Yvonne, can you join us and tell us where you're calling from today?
Well, I'm still in Sweden, so that's it.
I think I can tell it's dark. It looks like you have the lights on.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, but we still have daylight out. Sun won't set until 9:30, but it's getting darker. So autumn is coming. Now, I'm very intrigued by the discussion about churches. In Scandinavia, we have two churches that are built and based on our theology. One is in Stockholm, the main big church that is now 100 years old. And the architect was a young Adventist, and he was a licensed architect at that time. And he designed it with the idea of the symbols of the Temple of Solomon when he did. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, they did a renovation, and some of that sort of disappeared. And I believe much of the knowledge about it. But it was really well thought through. So when people came in and they called it a temple, they didn't call it a church, which was interesting. And some of it is still left, and it's quite intriguing, actually. And then the other church is in Denmark, south of Copenhagen, in a smaller city called Køge. And the architect was not an Adventist, but he studied our theology before he designed the church. And he has built it according to also to the temple in Jerusalem with a sort of the first part, and then it all ends up at the pulpit where sort of a cross that is in the tiles in the floor ends. So it's in the center of the cross is where the pulpit stands for preaching. And in the ceiling, there is, I don't know how many hundreds of bulbs hanging down as light. And I asked my hostess once I came there, and I said, "What's it?" "Oh, that's the rain. That's the rain of the stars in 1833. That's what he had read about, and so he did it that way." Sorry. Now, so churches can be designed with a symbol, also with Adventist symbols. That's my point.
Mhm.
Now, so maybe we should encourage art much more, because I don't think we do.
Mhm.
I think too much is ugly around. I have been to quite a few churches. Now, I have two other, and they're sort of comments, but also a question. How do we convey to our children that they can have a freedom in understanding our eschatology? And I'm thinking of one thing that Reinder's countryman, Pastor Karl van Osanen, once said in a sermon here in Sweden. He said, "Sometimes we make it much more difficult to become an Adventist than it is to enter heaven."
Mhm.
End quote. And then I'm thinking of this boy who 8-year-old boy who said to his mother, after seeing the traditional Sabbath school pictures of children on the new earth in long white robes, he said, "I don't want to go around in a long white dress." And he had a very wise mother. And she said to him, "No, you don't have to. I think you will have good genes to climb the trees in heaven with." And so he was very satisfied. So how do we really convey our faith in other ways than just doctrines? Can we not have more art, more humor, more sort of placement that sees to who is it that is wandering? Yes, thank you, Reinder, once more. So stimulating. And I have read your last article.
Okay. Well, and I read the letter that you sent me this week, and
Oh,
I will respond within days.
yeah, thank you.
Well,
Whenever it fits you.
it's interesting that you mentioned that church in Göge. Afi and I were there about 6-7 weeks ago, 8 weeks maybe, because I did a special day there in that little church in Denmark, and that was extremely pleasant. And I saw the special architecture, and they explained to me what the thinking was of
Mm.
of the architect. Now, I think you have a beautiful church also in Göteborg,
Yeah,
and that's a modern church.
but that is originally a Methodist church.
Well, that may be, but still, that is, I think, a very spiritual building.
It is. It
Uh,
is.
So we have some churches and in the suburbs of Paris, we have a church that was, I don't know what its origin was, but it's an 18th century building that is beautiful and is now a Seventh-day Adventist church.
Mm.
Anyway, how do we, your question, how do we make the eschatology for children a little bit more, attractive, or at least not meaningful for children? And when I see some of the material that has recently been published for children, to kind of children's seminar on the sanctuary, etc., etc., it just makes me sad that we should burden children with that kind of thing. And well, to tell, if let me put it this way: when we read in the Bible what Isaiah says of the new earth, and what John in his revelation says of the new earth, in fact, they use pictures and images that were familiar to the people in their time. And so we go with the spirit of the Bible if we explain to the children that the new earth in terms of things that they recognize, that they know, that they like, and that are part of their world. Artists have done that through the centuries, and the Bible has itself done that. So trying to put our 19th century eschatology over to our young people with all the details, I think it's just wrong. Was there anything else that you... Well, that was it, wasn't it? Okay.
Is that it, Yvonne? Okay. Thank you so much. I'm getting my internet instability messages again, so I'm blocking out my face, hoping that I'll get a better signal. And I'm going to go to Emmanuel. Emmanuel,
Yes,
can you
thank
share your thoughts with
you.
us today? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Florida.
Okay. Tell us what's on your mind.
I enjoy the presentation, but there is a practical aspect that I would like you to address. If the church is not perfect, and some member of the local congregation saw a problem and bring it to the church board, for instance, oh, no, don't deal with this. It's God's church. God will solve the problem itself. Do we have a responsibility when we saw something not going too well to get engaged, or we say, okay, it's God's church, God is going to deal with it at his own time, at his own space?
No. I think that is a very proper question to ask. And there is always a danger that when you say something like the kind of things that we have been saying, is that people say, well, then everything goes. And I'm not defending the idea that everything goes. There are standards, there are certain values that we must maintain. And when some people are openly denying some of the values, then it's difficult for them to be part of our community. And if some people say, well, some things are happening that we really shouldn't, then there may be an opportunity to have a discussion, have a talk about it. The fact that we realize that we cannot be perfect, that we will not be perfect, that we are all imperfect people, and also the people that we want to attract, they are imperfect. The fact that we recognize that does not mean that we do not want to have a community of a certain quality and that we are content with anything that happens. So, well, that would be my response, Brother Emmanuel. That sure, even though perfection might not be in our reach, there are things that we will not tolerate, and there are things that, if they are dubious, we will talk about together and see which way we need to go.
Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to call on Frances Priest. I got a message from Lauren that she's having difficulty figuring out how to raise her hand on whatever device she's on. So Frances, if you're there, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Are you able to speak?
I did.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Okay. I come to you from the mountains of Southern California.
All right.
And two quick comments. Well, two areas. In Tennessee, they had a chapel up at the camp that had a stained glass window of Christ holding a lamb like he was the shepherd. It was the most inspiring thing. And I love churches that, you know, give you a feeling of the awe or the love of God when you go in. And secondly, I think it was mentioned that we should maybe use a gym or something like that if we needed to have a church. And we had an offshoot church that was trying to be more liberal and have guitars and stuff in Southern California for a while. And at first they rented a church and it was beautiful and it was so much fun to go, and they could even have a Christ coming out of the tomb. But as less and less people went, or they got less money, they had to go to different places, and they ended up in a gym. And they used folding chairs, and it was just off in a corner in a small little area. It just didn't feel church-like at all to me.
Mhm.
And eventually it ended.
Mhm.
And when I was a principal of a small school in Southern California, a church wanted to rent our gym from us, but I encouraged them to rent the little fellowship room because it was so much cozier. And even when I went to educational meetings, if it was in a big area, it just felt cold. It was so much more intimate if it was in a smaller space. That's my comments.
Yes, well, have you ever been in Ghent in Belgium, where they have this beautiful painting of the Lamb of God? It's a
No.
piece, and go to the internet and find the Lamb of God painted by what's the name of Van Eyck? Jan van Eyck, A-Y-K. And there is no more beautiful picture of Christ and the Lamb of God than that altarpiece in the city of Ghent in Belgium. Meeting in gymnasiums and so on. You know, it used to be, I'm talking about Europe, it used to be quite difficult, certainly also in our country, 40, 50 years ago, to rent another church building. You know, they did not want to rent to us because we were a strange sect. And they didn't want to rent to these funny Seventh-day Adventists. Now that has totally different because it's totally different today. For one thing, we are more recognized as a normal kind of church, Protestant church, but also they all need money. And so it has become a lot easier to rent very beautiful churches for a reasonable amount of money. And I don't know whether that applies to many other countries. But of course, it presupposes that we would also be willing to rent our churches to others and share them. And that's the good thing. We are Sabbath keepers, and there are plenty of Sunday keepers, so we could actually help one another out. Yes.
Ray and Bobby, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And go ahead and let us know what you're thinking today.
Couple of things. It's the use of the word church, and it's bothered me for a long time. It seems that the original meanings goes way back, and it meant God's house, the Lord's house, master or Lord. And the way we often use and mostly use church, it really refers to an organization. So it seems we are misappropriating the word at times. Instead of thinking of it as a meeting with God, it's like it's a meeting with certain set of rules, regulations, and everything else. In other words, you're part of this church. We're really saying you're part of this organization. And to me, church and organization are really two different things. And it seems we, as somebody said, we conflate them too much. And then maybe that's why our buildings look like they are, or way the people feel that they feel when they're there. I mean, I've been to a cathedral. It was a small one. It was in New York City, not far from St. Patrick's. But I went in there at noontime. It was on a Friday, and somebody was doing their daily thing, playing the pipe organ. You couldn't see who it was, but massive pipes throughout the place. And when you heard the music being played, just sitting there, it was virtually like you were leaving. It was a deeply spiritual experience. I mean, it's hard to describe. you could not walk out of there without feeling like you had been enhanced, blessed, so to speak, like you had actually been in the presence of something. So I that kind of changed my mind about churches. Church is just, it's a building is the way we conflate it, but it's not. It's meeting with God. And I think we need to look at it more like that and say organization more often than saying church. That's just weird thoughts, ideas. Thank you.
Then what should we call it?
Yes.
I just said it.
Well, the word church, of course, is, as you say, used in different ways for an organization, for a faith community, for a local church, in particularly the people in the local church, the community. In the New Testament, it is never used with regard to a building. Of course, in the New Testament times, there were no churches, and the churches that had been organized by the apostles, etc., they met in houses of members who apparently were well-to-do and had a house large enough to house maybe 100 or so people. The word church and other words in Western languages like kerk in the Netherlands, kirke in some Scandinavians, or schurka in Scandinavian languages. These words are from related to the Greek word kurios, the Lord. So it's the Lord's. That is the connotation of what belongs to the Lord, kerk, church, etc. Or in some other languages like Église, and also in Spanish, and so it's related to ecclesia, the Greek word that means for those who have been called out. So in both cases, it has to do with the people that in some way are gathered out, belong to the Lord. And it does not refer to a building. But we are used to using the word also to refer to buildings. And okay, as long as we realize that it's the people in the New Testament who are called the church.
Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma. I'm going to go now to Ed Reichschneider. Ed, can you unmute, please? You calling from Colorado today?
I am calling Colorado.
Well, let us know what's going on.
Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma. Your presentations are always stimulating. I have a question. I'm getting away from the physical asset known as a church building, back more to the denominational focus. I'm wondering if it is psychologically, well, if it's healthy to an individual to psychologically create some space between themselves as a Christian and the denomination they belong to. I think one of the aspects of the Reformation was that salvation was an individual matter between God and the human. And if we identify too strongly with an imperfect organization, do we run the risk of getting pulled into what are the human imperfections of any organization? Any church, any organization that exists is flawed because it's run by human beings. And so I guess my basic question is it really healthy for Christians to put a little separation between themselves and their faith community, recognizing that their real question in their lives is, where do they stand with relationship to God?
All right. I think this is an important point, and I think I started with saying that this particular author, Rik Torfs, he says that the church is the institution that facilitates our faith in some ways, but should not be confused with being our faith, being the center of our faith. I want to, when I speak of myself, I want to be a Christian. But I want to be, as a Christian, I want to be part of a community. Now, I'm a member of the Seventh-day Adventist community. That is partly by accident, because my parents happen to be Seventh-day Adventists. It is certainly also partly by choice, certainly later on. And it's certainly by choice remaining one, because I want to be part of a community. And I have no reason, I think, to change my allegiance and go to a different kind of community, for the very fact that no community is perfect. And the community that I belong to now is satisfied many of my needs and my demands, even though it is far from perfect. Is there a little space between myself and the denomination? Yes, certainly, and maybe more than there was in the past. There was a time when I, to some extent at least, considered the Seventh-day Adventists as the only true church. And so there was also that very existential reason for wanting to be part of that church and remaining part of that church. I would not now say that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the only true church. I would rather say it's the corner of God's church where I have my spiritual home. And that puts a little bit of space between me and that spiritual home, while at the same time, I feel that that's still the place where I want to belong. I don't know whether that makes sense, Ed.
Yes, it does make sense. But I'm inferring from what you're saying that it creates a little independence of mind.
Mm-hmm.
To say that I am a Christian, I choose to be a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, but that's my choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a perfect organization, and my salvation is not dependent on it.
Yeah.
It's just, as you say, a fellowship.
Yeah. Correct.
I want to chime in here, if you don't mind. I liked the slide, Reinder, that you had that said the church, I may be getting it wrong because I don't have it right in front of me, but it said the church shouldn't define my relationship with God. That really spoke to me. I think that's important. And it made me think about in Adventist churches that I've attended, if there is this need or push toward conformity of belief, I personally feel that every church member is on their own spiritual journey. And sometimes your faith in God is stronger than other times. And there are times when you actually have questioning or disbelief. And I wonder if this need for conformity is chilling to people who are having existential crises or crises of faith. Do they feel that they can share that and get support from their community? Or do they shove it down because they fear that they will be ostracized or not welcomed in the church?
Very, very important point. And we are all at different points in our spiritual journey. And we must recognize, and sometimes when we have arrived at a certain conclusion and we have taken 15 or 20 years to do so, and we talk to other people about it, we wonder why they cannot accept it just in 15 minutes. But we have to give people also not only the space, but also the time that they need.
I appreciate your comments. I'm going to go to Doug and Teresa and ask you to unmute.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed the presentation. It was a broad spectrum of thinking about church. And I've always been an Adventist, raised as an Adventist. Had friends that were Catholics. Attended some Catholic ceremonies and services, including in Italy, specifically with dear friends of ours who are Catholic. But I'm actually thinking first of the church that Teresa and I first attended together, Mile High in Southern California. And in my memory, I see it as a beautiful church. Now, mind you, beautiful is in the eye of the beholder because the walls in the church were hollow, mostly filled up with acorns deposited there through holes in the wall created by squirrels. And so they were active, including during the ceremonies, during the services. It was a church that for the last 45 years was never owned by the congregation that we were a part of. Was rented from a guy who lived in LA. He was a landowner in that area. And yet we had wonderful fellowship there. It was a remarkably memorable experience for the years that Teresa and I were there. And at age 22, I think, I became the church leader of that congregation, which just blows my mind thinking about it now, looking back. The trust that those people had in my inexperience. But that building to me represents something wonderful, not because it was wonderful to look at, but because of the experience of that congregation. There was a guy who almost every Sabbath met every person at the door, Bob Tobias, big bear hug, and he would let you know that you were welcome there. And it didn't matter how you came. Most people came in blue jeans because it was the place you could go hiking in the afternoon after the service, after a potluck meal. And so it was the feeling that we had in that congregation that I think exemplified in a contrasting way the physical ailments and frailties of that building. And yet I'll never forget that as long as I live. And it's always been a special memory. Now I draw as a contrast to that, when Teresa and I traveled to Italy where our friends were, several times we went to the valley of the Valdisi, or in more Anglo terms, the Waldenses. And in studying those people, it was interesting because they made their churches a contrast to the Catholic churches and cathedrals of that area. They were simple, very straightforward, and beautiful in simplicity as opposed to beautiful in elegance. And I think Adventism has sort of patterned their churches often after that. But then a third contrast is when I see a Mormon church, almost without exception, I can tell you that that church is well constructed, well maintained. And to me, unfortunately, that's something of a contrast to Adventist churches that often and not always were, as one commenter in the chat said, were built by the lowest bidder. Not necessarily literally, but it did seem often that way because we often had huge maintenance problems and expensive ones at that. But I see sometimes our struggle with church buildings as Adventists mirror our struggle between our idolatry of art and our rejection, complete and total rejection of art. And I think that if we could figure out how we can do art, not just in structures, but art in covenant relationships with each other. That's what I think would most epitomize how we could build churches along the lines that Ed was talking about in terms of our relationship to each other. And I think if I could get rid of the 28 fundamentals and say that there were 28 fundamentals of covenant relationships that we pledge to each other, I would do that in a heartbeat. How do we relate to each other? And if we needed 28 parables, that could be the start of it. I would love to have 28 parables about how we relate to each other. And to me, I would sum that up in 2 words or 2 phrases. Is it life-giving or is it death-dealing? And to me, that's the beauty of what it could be to be an Adventist, where our sanctuary message is not about some theology, but about how we treat people. And in the current milieu, how we treat people who are from foreign countries, who are here. And do we treat our churches like you illustrated, Reinder, as a place of refuge where they can, for a few hours, feel that they're safe? Right now, they do not feel that way. And I wish that Adventism was that kind of sanctuary, not just to immigrants, but to all of us, whatever stripe, whatever ideas. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Thank you for your presentation.
Well, and thank you for your comments. And that idea of having 28 parables, I think that is something that needs some further thought. But yes, and some of the things that you said actually emphasize that buildings have very different meanings for people there. But in many cases, it is more than just the materials, but it has associations that may be different for different people.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Bill Garber, tell us what's on your mind.
Thank you. Two things, 2 topics have got my attention. One is the building, and one is the community. And it was 50 years ago this summer that I moved my membership from the Athens, Ohio church, where from which Lauren retired as the pastor not many years ago, along with several other in Appalachia, Ohio. And I think they were worried about the roof then, 50 years ago, and I guess still are. I would like to consider the possibility that there are many ways to be present in a community. And for some, it's getting the roof on the building is the thing that they feel most within their capacity to advocate for or to urge. It's real practical, and that brings me to the question of the conference owning the building and thinking, well, why doesn't the conference come down there and put a roof on their building and make sure that it's clean? Because if the building is the testimony to the presence of the organized religion in that community, maybe the owner of the building, not necessarily the people who are meeting there, and maybe the conference rents on some kind of a basis the use of the building, and then they take full responsibility to maintain the building. I don't know. I'm just kind of fantasizing, having gone to the SoCal camp meeting a couple of days and just couple of weeks ago and thinking about maybe 100 people attending the mid-morning service during the week. And thinking, the Academy building out here where you attended, Gina, and I taught a long time ago. There are not as many students, and it's hard to keep it going, but it's an incredibly valuable piece of ground. The conference could possibly become well endowed by the transfer of some physical properties. And what would that be like? So we're talking building here, and the community. We're Adventists for the same reason Catholics are Catholics and Buddhists are Buddhists, I think. It's a social experience. We're socialized into whatever the religion is that we are that we are identifying with. So we are like everyone else, or everyone else is like us in some kind of wonderful way. And that should not be a surprise if we truly believe that every human being walking the surface of the earth, or whoever has, is God's creation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is perhaps a way of welcoming people among us and being encouraged by understanding more about God, by understanding more about their experience of life. And maybe they will be curious and we can share our own experience. That community feeling, that social, we're all social Adventists, or we're Adventists for social reasons. And I appreciate very much, Reinder, your sense that quoting the author that said, the church helps us experience, but is not a replacement for our experience of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn from one another
Mm-hmm.
In that regard.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your thoughts today, especially. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill.
Well,
Go ahead.
You mentioned a couple of things that are more of a technical nature, financial nature. And of course, we have policies in the Seventh-day Adventist Church about buildings, and in particular about our use of tithe. And these policies that we have, we often do not recognize that they are man-made, but they are being handled as if they are more solid even than the Ten Commandments. There are certain things you can pay from tithe, and there are certain things that you cannot pay from tithe. Actually, there are some ways of dealing with it because organizations can actually exchange money with one another. And so then it suddenly becomes tithe money, becomes non-tithe money. But we make sure that we should not pay for buildings from tithe money. Well, I don't think there is a biblical basis for it. Maybe it's good to be sure that that tithe money is not spent without any further, just on buildings, etc., and real estate, but to look again at some of these rules and to make sure that they work for the best in particular circumstances. I think that would be long overdue. But
I just wanted to
go
ahead.
Go
ahead.
No, I was saying we're not going to solve this tonight in our meeting.
No, I wanted to comment about Monterey Bay Academy, which is a place where I studied English with Bill Garber as my English teacher. And I actually worked there as a development director. And there were people who had driven by the campus for 10 years, 20 years, and they would stop. I have been asked by people who've said, I've ridden my bike past this place for 10 years. What is it? Mm-hmm. That's embarrassing to me. And I think as Adventists, sometimes we are so focused on being exclusive and so focused on being the remnant that we lose touch with the rest of society. And it's just, I want to use an example of humor. I think we take ourselves way too seriously, and we have to just engage with the rest of the world and use humor as a part of it. I know when I was working as a prosecutor, I had a group of people that we always went out to lunch with, and I would always eat clean meat if I ate meat, and they were, I wouldn't eat pork, and lots of conversation about this. And so I explained to them about cloven hoofs and scavengers and bottom feeder fish and all that. And when I would sit down to lunch, they would put their hands up like this, making cloven hoofs just to make fun of me, which I thought was hilarious. But you can't take yourself too seriously. I was in a Kiwanis club, and my predecessor from Monterey Bay Academy, who was the representative there, was a vegetarian. And one of the Kiwanis members, he was gone. I was his replacement. I did eat meat, and I put some chicken on my plate. And he says, so I have a question for you. Do Adventists eat meat? And I said, well, the actual true answer to that question is not around other Adventists. Well, they all broke into laughter. And this broke, I was one of them after this. They could see I could laugh at myself. I could be part of the group. And it wasn't going to be this creepy, weird thing going on. So I think you have to engage people. You have to use humor. And don't be embarrassed about what you do or who you are. Just own it. Just own it and laugh at yourself. There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think.